Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello, and a happy new year from Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, the man about whom it was once said, and you can now insert your own comment here, and then listen into Musical Talk episodes over the course of the year to see if your comment was right. Well, it's 2016, and that's a very special year for Musical Talk because this year we'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary. But that's going to be a bit later in the year. At the moment, 2016 is already shaping up as an interesting year for musical theatre in all its different aspects, and we at Musical Talk hope to be looking at many of those and bringing them to you. But what better way of starting a new year of musical theatre than with new shows in development, in a showcase which is open to the public? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. January can be such a miserable month. All the joy and fun of the festive season's over, and frankly, everyone's sort of hoarding their pennies and staying in because it's so dark at night and cold and miserable. Well, what you need, and what we all need, is more musical theatre, and that's available to you on the 5th. That's the first Tuesday of 2016, because you can see the Lowdown, which is a scratch night of extracts of new musical theatre work being held at the Rich Mix Cinema and Arts Centre in the Bethnal Green Road in London. In just a minute we're going to be hearing from one of the contributors, who's also one of the curators of this scratch night of new musical theatre. But just to give you some idea of what it's about, the Lowdown 2016 will comprise 6 extracts of new musical theatre writing from an open submission process. The curators, Hannah Elsey and Henry Carpenter, then paired each of the submissions with writers and performers, and then in each case a day of rehearsal will take place before the showcase actually occurs in the evening of Tuesday the 5th of January at 7:30. And the aim of the evening is not to show material that is perfect, but for the writers or directors to take risks and to think about how each piece can develop in the future. I think this is a really exciting idea. We don't have nearly enough of these workshops or scratch nights here in London. They do occur, but a little bit few and far between. And they're really worth going to. This is a fine example, and it's not a closed session. Although there'll be performers and writers and people like that there, it is open to the public. The price is only £4 for the tickets. To me, this is an enticing prospect for the beginning of the year, so I'm going to be there, and I wanted to find out more about it. And spotting that Henry Carpenter was involved as one of the curators of the event, he and I met up in London very recently to talk about the Lowdown and the 6 shows which are going to be showcased there. And if you think you know the name Henry Carpenter, well, you do. We've spoken to him before here at Musical Talk. He's the man who was behind, and indeed in front of, the Quentin Dentin Show, one of those shows in Edinburgh which I've spoken about a lot because I liked it a lot. Let's listen now to me and Henry talking about this scratch night, and also some of his new work, and the lessons he learnt from last year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe. And as an added treat, at the end of the interview, you'll be able to hear a brand new exclusive to Musical Talk recording of a song by Henry that you can hear at the Lowdown Scratch Workshop event. And the name of that song?
I Belong in Space.
Musical Talk. Henry.
Hello.
Lovely to see you again. We met in Edinburgh this last summer when you had that fantastic show, the Quentin Dentin Show, when you were the star of that show. And of course you were one of the creative people behind it, in fact the creative person behind it. But we are here in the cold, cold months of January at the beginning of 2016. And whilst the memory of Quentin Dentin burns bright, you've got brand new exciting things coming up, and not just your own things as well. There's
That's
a,
right,
sort of
yeah.
a pluralist approach you're taking for the new year. So is it rude to ask, what is it that you're doing? What are you presenting up to for the waiting world?
Hi Thos, first of all, it's great to be back with you speaking again. On January the 5th, Hannah Elsey, the producer of the Quentin Dentin Show, and myself, co-curating a night of new musical theatre writing at Rich Mix, which is a Shoreditch arts venue. And this
Fashionable East London.
Fashionable East London, that's right. And deep in the heart of fashionable Shoreditch, there will be this night of exciting new musical theatre writing.
So this is really a showcase, isn't
This
it?
this is a showcase of new work, yeah.
Of several new pieces of work. Now, forgive me, I always find these very interesting because they do pop up every now and then. They're very common in America. And they're a really good idea. They're an opportunity in a semi-friendly environment for people to try out work. Well, I say semi-friendly because there's members of the public there, but also many friends and family and other professionals and creatives, as well as other people who are performing, are in the same venue. So it's normally a fairly warm, encouraging environment. I've been to a few. I always find them very interesting. I find them very much a mixed bag, but that's not the problem because they're supposed to be that. In a way, it's an opportunity to try things out, and the proof of the pudding is in the trying. However, I find it very interesting that they're often put on by theatres or groups, but how did this one come about?
This came about because Rich Mix is a venue that we have ties with because they co-produced the Quentin Denton show in its Edinburgh incarnation. They offered us this night kind of to do what we wanted with, and I have various things that are sort of in kind of inchoate 10-minute states at the moment that I wanted to put in front of other people, but mostly I currently am fortunate enough to know a great number of people who are unknown musical theatre writers, and the thing about musical theatre is, it's such a huge kind of epic collaborative thing that it's very hard to actually get something performed if you're just kind of one person. I'm very lucky to be part of a company and a crew of producers and actors and things. I just happen to have quite a good network around me, but a lot of people who I've got to know in the last year, many of whom I've got to know through the BML, Book Music and Lyrics, Musical Theatre Writing Workshop, which is a fantastic resource that everyone should get involved with. Many people find it very hard to put musical theatre on its feet. So what we're doing on this night is we've chosen 6 pieces. Some of them are extracts from shows that are in development, and some of them are pieces that are complete in 10-15 minutes, 10-15-minute pieces.
So mini musicals.
Mini musicals, yes. That's right. And we are hooking up these writers with actors and directors. Each piece is going to have its own director. These are connections that we've made for the writers and the directors.
So it's the community working with itself too?
Yeah, we're basically trying to foster a community here, but more than anything, trying to get stuff on its feet that doesn't normally get on its feet. As I say, musical theatre is kind of, I think, one of the hardest live art forms to get on its feet. It's pretty easy with
singer-songwriter.
It's easy for singer-songwriters. It's easy for bands comparatively. It's pretty easy for people writing shows. It's quite easy to drum up friends to sort of put on a scratch of a play or something. But I don't know. So many writers of musical theatre aren't performers, and you just don't see a lot of kind of scratches of these things. And we just wanted to put some kind of raw and new and unusual work on its feet.
Well, the last one I went to was now a good year or so ago. It was at the Union Theatre. But what was fantastic to me was it gave me as an opportunity, as someone interested in musical theatre who doesn't create, but I watch and enjoy. I saw exactly as you've described, a smorgasbord of different things. Sometimes they were 2 or 3 songs from a show that was in development. Sometimes they were 2 or 3 songs from a show which was finished but hadn't yet been produced. Sometimes they were actually just standalone songs, if you like, Tin Pan Alley numbers, which somebody had written and wanted to try out. Not in the singer-songwriter tradition. They were obviously an attempt at some stage to develop things into a show, but it wasn't even at that stage, it was just songs. And indeed, I went on to interview at least one of the people at that event sometime after the event had finished, because I'd been so impressed by their work. So there was I, if you like, for all intents and purposes, come in, buy my ticket punter, so someone off the street who was sufficiently impressed that actually I went on to have a rather marvellous interview with the chap who'd written some of the songs. So
well, hopefully you'll feel the same way on January the 5th.
I rather hope so.
Yeah.
But there's lots of questions to ask when you're sort of workshopping in an environment like this. You've gone for 6, I think you said.
We've gone for 6,
and
yeah.
they're about 15 minutes each,
That's right.
That's an hour and a half. How did you pick the duration of your evening? Did you say to yourself, let's get as many as we can in, we're at 3 hours, we've got to trim it down? Or
no, we decided to stop at 6. We felt that was about as much as people would be able to take. It's pretty exhausting readjusting 6 times. I think that's about the limit, to be honest. I don't know, 6 15-minute things is I would say about 6 times harder work to watch than 1 hour and a half long thing. We wanted to know when to stop.
You're right about recontextualising. That was one of the things I did. You're just speaking as a punter. It's one of the things I found a little bit curious. And the people who were most comfortable in the environment at the Union Theatre I'm talking about were the other performers and singers, the people in the profession. But this event you're running, like the Union one, is open to the public, so it's not it's not a closed shop.
We are trying to do something that's a bit more like an actual event that's meant for other people, punters.
And at the end of the day, that is must be what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
There's not very much point. On the one hand, obviously, we want to foster relationships between people, but that's really secondary to putting on a good show. Putting on a good show is always the important thing, and we're not putting anything on stage that we don't think is not going to be a good show, because that's the whole point of doing it. If you're doing something that is interesting but not entertaining, then we're not interested in that on this particular night. This is about trying to put together a variety show that is nonetheless a good night, rather than a sort of an artists-only experimental forum.
It's outward-looking first,
that's right,
not inward-looking, because that can be the danger sometimes at workshops as well. And
I think it's immensely tedious when you go and see things that are completely inward-looking.
But if you're not part of the in-crowd, it absolutely is, because it also then becomes exclusive. And the problem is, the moment you realise you've been excluded from an environment, you can actually become resentful. And so if the thing gets fully worked up and comes out in 2 years' time and ends up in the West End, you go, well, I went to their workshop, or I went to their showcase, and, it's jobs for the boys kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you're right to have that attitude, I think. And if a show, any show this is, none of this is very profound, but a show to succeed has got to have, if you could get bums on seats, to use a horrible modern phrase, but it works, it explains what it's doing.
Yeah.
And that's always going to be people outside the profession. It's got to be walk-up, hasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
But I hope people will be excited, as I was, to learn that you have one or two items on display.
Yes.
This open sandwich will have some very delicious nuggets placed upon it.
That's right, yes. In my typically monomaniacal fashion, I have taken up 1/3 of the programme myself.
That's only 2 items.
It's only 2 items, yeah. One of which is a 15-minute long self-contained opera, I suppose you would call it, if you could call something 15 minutes long an opera. But it's very much in the style of sort of Benjamin Britten, and it's about hell and redemption through pain. And it's very, very serious, and I've written that with a wonderful composer called Elizabeth Charlesworth, who has... I don't remember any of the names of her shows offhand, but she's written a great number of shows.
She has a CV, which
she has an extremely impressive CV, and she's a wonderful composer. And the second item that I'm forcing upon this night is a new comedy one-man show that I'm currently working on, which is very much in the style of Quentin Denton, which is called Summer Nights in Space. Summer Nights in Space is a dark comedy about an astronaut who nobody liked at space base, so they got him drunk and they put him on a rocket which is never going to come back. And he's stuck in space, and he's just very, very sick of space. And he's having all of these Captain Kirk-esque adventures, but he's just absolutely sick of it. It's basically in sort of exploration of the idea that you can get bored of anything, and it just
the
tedium of adventure, and just the fact that I think the suffix in space kind of makes anything funny. It's a
as in pigs in space.
As in pigs in
agree.
Space. As in, absolutely anything in space is just amusing. And Summer Nights in Space is a 15-minute slice of what I hope will become a larger show about space and about the human condition.
But let's just piece those two things together, because what you've just shown me immediately, just describing two very different shows, is, a range and a versatility and a breadth of vision, because you've got a 15-minute self-contained mini musical opera, for want of a better phrase, about redemption and the darker things in life, which is clearly very serious. And in that, you're also the lyricist rather than the composer.
That's right, yes.
So these are new things for you. But you're also on the other end of the scale, looking at this extract of a much wider show, which is going to be much more overtly comic, clearly already is, has a much more sort of knowing sensibility, and is a one-man piece and things like that. So that's, I'm not going to call it a rock opera, but I'm using that as a kind of shorthand, from a schlock opera or a rock opera, something musically comedic all the way through to the pain of redemption in an operatic form. You're a man who's fearless, aren't you? Is that fair?
It's not like being a firefighter, is it? Writing music, it's not very much to be scared of.
But some people trammel themselves. Some people say, I do this and this is what I do.
Well, I think that's it goes without saying that that's a silly thing to do.
It is, but a lot of people do it.
Well, more fool them. I don't want to aggrandise myself. I'm not necessarily particularly good, but I am interested in trying out new things and not staying on the same ground.
Yeah, you have a breadth of adventure yourself. So let's talk about the first one first.
Sure.
Pointless thing to say, but let's do it. It sounds... I suppose what I want to actually explore is the concept of the mini musical. We've discussed it on Musical Talk before with a very excellent exponent of that particular art called Michael Gordon Shapiro. And he says one of the great things about the mini musical is actually, funny enough, I'm not going to say entry-level method of writing a musical, but because it's self-contained, it's very easy to send to events like this, and therefore it's much easier to get something seen because it's a mini musical, because actually there are opportunities for shorter things to go on, and people are prepared to take a punt or put it in as something else or as a warm-up or whatever it is, than if you were saying, hello, I've got a 2-act piece or a 3-act comedy opera.
I think entry level is a very good way of putting it, actually. I think, also from I would encourage people to do mini musicals, because it's always a fantastic exercise in consistency of tone and sort of consistency of vision, things that can be really difficult to actually focus on if you're working on a bigger show, because these things, once you sort of lose sight, once you get into a huge show, these things kind of either come together or they don't. Whereas if you're doing something short, you can the end's always in sight, and it's really, really good practice. It's a really great exercise.
I suppose it's like cutting the hair of one person rather than mowing the lawn in a stately house.
Yeah, sure, exactly.
I wonder, however, because it sounds very... I'm going to use the word simple wrongly, but it sounds in itself a fairly simple thing to do, to say, coming up with a 15-minute piece, but actually it strikes me that often a condensed piece or a short piece is possibly the harder. And you've already mentioned consistency of tone and feel. And also, presumably, even in the book, you've got to find a way of getting a story across with a profile. So it's not just A to B, but it's A to B via C or something. There's got to be something in the story that gives it, as I say, a profile, a sort of contour map, to make it interesting. And that's hard in 15 minutes, particularly if you've got to then find the balance between number of songs and
Absolutely.
climaxes and things like that. And you're working now with a collaborator, which you've been very... One of the joys of talking to you, Henry, is your honesty. You were saying very honestly when you were talking about Quentin Dentin and its development that you felt most comfortable working on your own. So this is forcing you by choice into something different. How are you finding the constraints of the piece and the new way of working for you? And do they work together to make it happen or not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a piece that is so much of its identity is in the music, because it's scored all the way through in a sort of operatic fashion.
It's a sung-through piece?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it's got a very, very distinctive musical style. As I say, its identity is most immediately musical, I would say. I find working with collaborators can be so much better, but it can also be so much worse. It really just depends on the collaborator,
It's about being simpatico, isn't it? Really,
it really is, and I mean that's a very obvious thing to say, but it's I don't think that either way is better or worse, but it can be so much better and so much worse.
Well, funnily enough, it has to be professional simpatico, doesn't it? That ability to find the marriage which works, rather than
sometimes you really like someone, but it's just it's like a doomed romance.
And the other way round, you can work really well with someone but not get on with them. I mean, obviously the daddies of that are Gilbert and Sullivan.
Sure, yeah.
But being able to make that difference between a professional relationship in terms of being able to write and how you respond on a personal basis to your collaborator. Sometimes people find that very difficult to separate one from the other. I mean, you obviously have a great deal of respect for your composer here, because you were saying wonderful things about her at the beginning. So hopefully that professional aspect works. But, you're still having to explore it, I guess. How easy is it to explore a relationship like that and still get the goods out, i.e. the songs?
I think one of the key skills in the arsenal of any artist who is doing any sort of collaborative work is tact. I think that kind of actually sometimes, often comes above things like vision or talent. Tact is just kind of the number one thing you need if you're doing a collaboration, and I'm certainly not always tactful, but in this particular case with this piece Demons, I have a great deal of respect for Elizabeth on a personal level, and I was just very careful to be respectful, and it's not rocket science. If you're respectful with people and you...
No, that's Summer Nights in Space, isn't it?
That's right, that's Summer Nights, that is rocket science.
Yes.
Sorry. But it's I think it's just a question of respecting personal boundaries and making art just in the same way that you approach making conversation. Just because you're writing a piece of musical theatre doesn't mean that you can start being inappropriate or pushy or rude. It's exactly the same as talking to someone.
But, and this is what I find particularly interesting in the relationships, the personal aspects of writing, because you have to mine yourself when you're creating, I think, to a degree, and learn about yourself. And hopefully the audience will learn something about themselves as well from the truth. I mean, I know this is all pretentious, highfalutin stuff, but you're right, you do have to have tact, and you do have to have diplomacy, but for a good working relationship, it appears to me, and you must tell me if I'm wrong here, but also you need to have honesty.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Honesty and diplomacy don't always
No,
go together.
I disagree. I think you can say what the hell you like to people if you couch it diplomatically. You can get away with murder. You just have to know how to say it.
Oh, that's interesting. I've seen people who have got their analysis is cold-blooded, and that's sometimes been really helpful in the creation when you're dramaturging a piece yourself as the creators rather than getting someone else in. And you do have to, Mark Twain says you have to kill your babies. Telling someone that you don't think something they've done works, whether it be the lyric or the music, or that's even diplomatically to say, actually, you put a lot of work into that, but it just is, I don't think it's working. But there are unpalatable truths to get a better work, aren't there, sometimes?
It's tough. I mean, on the one hand, yes, sometimes you do need to get kicked in the teeth and kick people in the teeth. Sometimes that's what's necessary to move a thing forward. On the other hand, I always personally try to resist for as long as possible the moment where you have to say, look, this is wrong, because often you're wrong.
But working out who's wrong can be the problem, can't it, sometimes? Because if something's not working, and I'm not saying this is happening in any of your work, but I'm just interested in the creative dynamic, because that's the thing. One of the things that really interests me is just how people create. And you're a good example, because you create brilliantly on your own, but you also create excellently in collaboration.
Well, thank you.
So that means you've seen one and the other. And I just wondered what observations you've come to yourself that have helped you approach them in different ways, presumably.
As I mentioned before, I've been doing this book music and lyrics course for a year, which is a workshop of musical theatre writing where they pair up. You're either on it as a lyricist or a composer, and you get paired up and assigned mini assignments, sort of songs from they give you a play and you have to adapt. You have to do a charm song from a theoretical adaptation of this play or something. I've done a lot of collaboration with very different types of collaboration with different people over the last year. Very few of them have gone wrong. I think it's really just you just have to be able to listen to people.
I suppose, and at the end of the day, that is the secret, isn't it? And that's the first step into diplomacy. It's
I'm sorry. I'm not saying anything particularly revelatory here, but I do stand by what I say that collaborating creatively with someone is just like talking. You've just got to listen and know how to take cues and things. In my opinion.
Well, let's boil it down to this particular case then. It was called Demons.
Demons is the name of this piece, yeah.
And it's a sung-through 15-minute mini opera, I think we're going to have to call it. Now, opera in itself is a frightening word for a lot of people. It's a frightening word for a lot of people involved in musical theatre, because it's known to be a different thing too, even though, of course, it is musical theatre in its broadest sense. I was talking earlier about the fact that you seem to me to be quite fearless, which I think is a good thing. But who came up with the idea of making it operatic? And have you at any stage had to take a sharp intake of breath at the prospect?
No, I think it was. I think we simultaneously came to the conclusion pretty early on that in order to make this story and this concept work, we'd have to, because the piece is about torture in hell. It's about being tortured for your sins in hell, and it's about. Our aim was always to create an incredibly oppressive and painful atmosphere to essentially put the audience through hell and through 10,000 years of torture in about 15 minutes. And really I know it sounds great, doesn't it? The only
way to do it if you're going to do that.
The only way to do that, really, we felt was to just really go all in with the mood and create a real intensity and a real kind of really visceral atmosphere, and the best way to do that is music.
And opera?
Well, it becomes opera when everything is sung. I mean, that's just
Yes, I mean, you make a good point there.
But I think it's particularly appropriate because the style of music that Elizabeth chose to go with on this piece is very reminiscent of Benjamin Britten. It's a sort of
discordant melody.
Discordant, yeah. It's a very operatic style, and it will be familiar to fans of that kind of style.
It also seems to me that actually when people think of opera, they often talk about high drama. But Eternal Torture in Hell is likely to be full of at least emotional rendering, shall we say, of the individual, which counts as high drama in my book. And of course we're used to that heightened emotional state that we attribute to opera, whether that's true or not, but that's the sort of a truism of opera. You can get that from musical theatre, of course, in its more traditional sense, but I see that it's immediately turning the gas up to top notch, isn't it,
exactly,
with an opera? And that seems to be what the book is suggesting, which just takes us back to Sondheim, which is content dictates form, isn't it? Which seems to be the thing that everything eventually comes back down to. Are you pleased with it?
I'm extremely pleased with it.
What have been the best bits and the most challenging bits for you?
It's actually been a joy to work on. We worked very hard on it, and we presented it at Book Music and Lyrics to a team of to a panel of professionals, one of whom was a professional who'd worked with Sondheim and who'd worked with all of the people, and he was a choreographer, and he immediately said, "I'd like to direct this." Like, it was that was an amazing moment, sort of payoff.
Yes, very much so. But has anything in the construction of the piece been challenging for you? It's perfectly okay to say no, actually. I'm surprised how easily opera comes to me.
This particular piece has been an absolute joy, but as I mentioned to you earlier, I have spent a huge amount of the last 3 or 4 months since Edinburgh working on a piece that I can't talk about with a ex-pop star who I can't talk about. And that is also a kind of opera. That's a synth-pop epic opera. That has been immensely challenging. But again, it's what I was saying, with a 15-minute piece, you really lose a lot of those problems of sort of story pacing and whatnot. There are huge problems and head scratchers in opera, just about how to pace a story, because if everything's sung, everything's so elongated, and it can be really hard to be snappy or actually connect with people, not have your audience just go into a sort of music trance. There are loads and loads of difficulties with
trance, I like that.
Yeah, well, you know how it is.
It's
so much more passive when there's music all the way through. But with a 15-minute piece, particularly a 15-minute piece about torture using horrible words, a sort of a language and a mise en scène that's full of knives and cutting and sort of it's essentially Hellraiser the musical is this thing that we've done. It's quite easy to keep the audience's attention, and you don't have to worry so much about form because you can keep your eye on the whole thing. So actually, it's been a real pleasure and a real I wouldn't say breeze because we've had to put a lot of work into it, but it's been unproblematic, this piece, and it's one of those rare things in writing where something comes out really well and you don't really have any regrets, which comes along once in a blue moon.
Well, you've also got, if I may say, and I think people may forget this, because although you're a very accomplished sort of rock singer in your own right, actually your musical roots are much broader, aren't they? And you did, I think you're in a choir, so there's a history of sacred music, shall we say, in your developmental years.
That's right.
Has that paid off here in this piece about hell?
Oh yeah, it plays off in everything. Everything I do is based on my grounding in liturgical music. Absolutely, the basis of my entire musicality, and it comes through in everything. Yeah.
So, I think we're going to have to go from, I'm going to use the phrase, from the sublime to the ridiculous.
Sure, yeah.
Because I do feel this is the very moment to then leap onto Summer Nights in Space.
Right, yeah.
With an exclamation mark?
Probably, yeah.
It feels like it perhaps.
Yeah.
It's calling for one. Now, I'm guessing that's not so based on your sacred music roots. Well, I mean, it may have. I could be misjudging it. How did this one come about? I'm sorry, forgive me. And this is a Henry special, isn't it?
Summer Nights in Space.
Great title.
Thank you.
Before we go anywhere, it's a title. You mentioned it before we started recording, and it brought a smile to my face immediately. And it's gone into that little book of things must see.
Thank you.
So,
well, you've got a song from it, which I hope will feature in this podcast.
It will. I'd like you to introduce it a little bit later.
Okay. Okay, well, Summer Nights in Space is an idea that I've had for about a year, and is something that's been sort of gestating and that I'm now knocking together incredibly quickly. Like, I started writing it a week and a half ago, and
right.
it's going to be a real kind of outpouring, I guess. But Summer Nights in Space is... It's this idea that I've had for a while, and I just thought it was something that I was led onto from the Quentin Denton show, because there's a sequence in the Quentin Denton show where they go into space.
Yes.
And that always was a big kind of audience favourite, that sequence. And I was also led onto Summer Nights in Space by the themes of the Quentin Denton show. Now, the Quentin Denton show, if I might be so bold and poncy as to talk about the themes of the play what I'd done, it's about kind of encroaching homogeny, and the way that the world is changing, and the way that technology is affecting us, and the way that our lives are changing in ways that we may not necessarily see until it's too late. Summer Nights in Space is kind of the answer to that, where it's a show on a thematic level, I guess, that is about what happens when that's happened, what it's like then. And as such, it's a show about one man who is stuck on a spaceship with a faintly patronising computer, and is utterly bored of being in the most remarkable and transcendental setting that the universe has to offer, which is outer space. And he's doing it. He's Captain Kirk. He's living the dream, and he's having all these adventures, but he's just completely bored and isolated and sort of depersonalised. It's really... The whole show came from just this idea of being bored of space, which I just found very funny for some reason. And the version of Summer Nights in Space that I'm going to be presenting in January is essentially just a test run of whether this idea, this notion of bored of space, is sustainably funny.
Whether it's got wings and can fly.
Exactly, whether it's got wings.
I like it. Before we were talking about this central conceit of being bored by adventure, the tedium of adventure. But I also like this the thematic thread you're drawing from some of your previous work, notably Quentin, which is the commodification of life. And the commodification almost of adventure in this case. It seems that if it becomes... Indeed, you use Captain Kirk, but actually Star Trek is a very good avatar here, I think, in the sense that it's episodic. Every adventure will last 50 minutes if you're watching Star Trek.
And they'll be back at the beginning when they get to the end.
No one has learnt anything. No. And it's even colour-coded, isn't it? You know, if you're wearing a particular colour top, you're not coming back.
Totally.
So... that's not to knock Star Trek particularly,
no, Star Trek's wonderful,
but it does have... There's a touch of formula to it, even in its adventure. Now, I'm not saying that the adventures that our spaceman here has got are going to fall into that. But I love this idea of being bored by the most thrilling things on Earth. And you see that in, even in classic literature of the kept woman who has everything that she might possibly want and yet isn't happy.
Well, you see that in a lot of Russian literature in particular.
Yes.
This is going to sound very pretentious, but one of the main inspirations for Summer Nights in Space was Oblomov.
Go on.
Which is a sort of I think a 19th century Russian book about a aristocrat who's too lazy to tax his serfs, and he just the first half of this kind of very dense book, he's on the sofa, he doesn't get up, and it's just this whole book about kind of weariness and
lounge lizardry.
Lounge lizardry, exactly. Yes. And I don't know, I'm interested by that. It sounds oxymoronic, and I hope that it doesn't sound ridiculous to everyone, but I mean, I'm interested by boredom, and I think it's a funny thing to see. It can be really funny. Like if you look at Beckett, like, that's funny. That's all about nothing happening, and it's very funny. There's a rich heritage of British comedy, particularly in the work of like Rick Mayall and Nate Edmondson. All of those things are very Beckettian. If you look at like Bottom and The Young Ones, all of those shows are about nothing happening.
Did and they not the shows on to do Waiting for Godot?
They did in fact do Waiting for Godot as a double act. Yeah,
it feels like the natural progression, doesn't it?
But Bottom, for example, is a show all about two disgusting men in a disgusting flat going, I'm so bored. And Summer Nights in Space is, I guess, trying to tap into that, like the comedy of nothing,
It's the failure of potential, in a sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But actually, this is a thematic link with Quentin Denton again, though, isn't it? Because Mr. and Mrs. Ordinary, if you like, the real couple, are not wasters, but they aren't doing very much with their lives.
No.
And the vista, which is at least allegedly opened up before them, is one of fulfilling potential. And then we have to ask ourselves whether the potential future that they're being offered is satisfactory or not. That's these are fairly profound questions about the reality of being. So actually, although you've dressed these things up rather splendidly as comedy, they do seem to come down to a question of paths to be taken, paths not to be taken, or worse yet, no path at all being taken, almost just drifting.
Yeah, well, it's interesting stuff, but I think you have to make it funny. Like, but like there's nothing more horrible than serious existentialism.
Yeah.
It's like salt with more salt.
Yes, you mean someone's stolen the fish and chips?
Yeah.
Yes. You make a very good point, as always. I wonder how much of this is a fear in you. Do you have a fear of not potentialising, if such a word can be said to exist, but the fear that people in general, it's so difficult to achieve all that you might be? I mean, I think we must all do that.
Yeah,
I
think everyone feels like that. I'm terrified of everything. I'm scared of death. I'm scared of getting out of bed in the morning. Yeah, no, I mean, I think we all are.
And yet you embrace life, I think. I say this because every time I see you, you've always got lots of new things that you've done.
Well, because I embrace life by writing sort of caustic nonsense and not really engaging, socially. It's not. It's a way of embracing life. But
it's a highly community spirit, a community environment, as you were saying at the beginning of this episode. In fact, really.
And I
know you are.
But no, I don't want to. I'm perfectly fine. But I think everyone worries about these things, and I think that's why they're interesting.
I do too, but not everyone finds that a creative dynamic, I suppose. Most people just sit home and worry about it. I like the fact that you pick up, I'm not saying your fears particularly, but the human condition, and then say, right, actually, I'm going to slap the word in space on it and make it funny, but my word, there's still something underneath it. It's got teeth.
Yeah, well, it's early days yet with Summer Nights in Space. As I say, the version that I'll be showing in January is very much, it's going to be me in a stupid spaceman outfit, sort of
looking forward to it,
monologuing and playing these ridiculous songs, and it's very much a kind of proof of concept. But yeah, I'm hoping to turn Summer Nights in Space into something special, although it may take a while, because I want to give it that real depth,
We'll come back to this rather splendid. What are we calling it? Workshop night, is it? Or
I guess you could call it a showcase night. Yeah.
In just a minute, but I'd like, if I may, to draw your attention backwards just for a shake. If that's the opposite of potentiality, I'm afraid, which is to your Edinburgh experience overall.
Sure.
If you don't mind, because the Quentin Dentin show was one of those rare shows which was pretty much up there for the whole run, which is a good 3.5 weeks slog for any performer. And no one can accuse you of being anything other than active up there, because not only were you doing a nightly show, you were also, I remember, performing on a stage on the Mile, and putting in a good gig, 40 minutes to an hour every night, I think it was as well. So no one could say that they weren't getting their money's worth out of you. But now that the dust has settled and, you finished taking the pills and the obvious coming back down to earth and actually just taking stock, is it rude to ask, because no one ever says, retrospectively, what have you learnt from Edinburgh? What are the lessons to be learnt, not necessarily what you've learnt?
I think that for any, not just writer, but for any performer, and in particular any writer or any producer or director, putting a show on in Edinburgh is an invaluable lesson in what sells and what works for an audience, because on the Royal Mile there's about twice as many performers as punters, and it really is a fight for the bums that go on the seats. In a world of look at me, how do you get people to look at you? And the answer is by giving them something that they recognise, something that they kind of that are interested in already, because there's a hook, And that sounds very obvious, but a lot of people, myself included, this summer go up to Edinburgh with an aim to be really kind of outside the box, and it is, while the festival does give you a platform for that, and people will see you, major success, critical and sort of recognition and financial success in Edinburgh really depends on you being very canny about playing to the crowd. And that was the most resonant lesson that I learned in Edinburgh. Watching what sold, being downstairs from Midsummer Night's Dream and being outside by Midsummer Night's Dream every night. I don't resent it. It was just really interesting. I was like, Midsummer Night's Dream is, everyone's seen Midsummer Night's Dream, but everyone wants to see Midsummer Night's Dream again. That's really interesting. And they want to see it more than a musical that they haven't seen. It's interesting.
Can I ask you a serious question?
Yeah.
I love your observations, but if Edinburgh was completely free, every show was completely free, do you think that would still be the case?
I think it would still be the case, yeah.
You do? You don't think people, because money's involved, even in small amounts of money?
No. People want to see, people don't want to waste an hour of their life on something that looks really disturbing or offensive.
When you can have EastEnders the musical.
Precisely. So many shows in Edinburgh are like, witness my pain, and no one really wants to witness your pain. And so you have to find a way to dress up that in something that people want to see.
I suppose the word is traditionally engagement, isn't it?
Yes.
You can sell anything as long as you know how to find the human link. Because even in the tragedies, there will be stories. I mean, I've had, they may not have sold out, but one of my friends who reviews in Edinburgh for one of the websites, I should say, and very kindly comes on to Musical Talk occasionally, Josh Clark, was most excited by a show that was about depression.
No, really?
But because it was done in a non-depressive way, if that makes sense. At least
well, there are a lot of shows about depressing things at Edinburgh, but there's a way of being uplifting about depression, and there's a way of being like mainstream about non-mainstream issues. And then it really comes down to a state of mind, I think, on the part of the creators. Some people, if you set out to engage people and you're fortunate enough to be that type of person as well, if that's your temperament, then it's entirely possible to make an uplifting and accessible show about depression, and excelsior to people who do. But the Quentin Denton show was a very, very offbeat look at something that's quite nebulous, and it featured a lot of weird comedy and a lot of weird songs, and we had some great reviews, one of the best of which was from you. Thank you. That really carried us along.
Well, yeah, but you did all the work. I just I rock up and talk about it afterwards. But
appreciate it still, but it was a real eye opener. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to carry on talking about Quentin Denton because I think it's a great show. But one of the many great things that I loved about it was the fact that it stayed with me after Edinburgh. And I saw some great things in Edinburgh, which I've not thought of since. And so you think, well, were they great? They were enjoyable, but were they great? And actually, the things which I still think of now, and there's just a handful, but those are the ones, and they're not always the shows I enjoyed the most. Yours is one of the shows I enjoyed a great deal, but there were a few shows I didn't enjoy, but actually have stayed with me because of their scope or ambition, or that they did one thing that was amazing sometimes, in a field of dross, there was one beautiful flower, or something. So what stays with you isn't necessarily easy to predict, but those are the shows that are not necessarily a success, or have at least some success in them. Quentin Denton, I think, actually was coherently and notably successful from first to last, but it was also interesting enough for me to still be chewing over some of the ideas that it's come out. I'm waiting for the feature film.
That's very kind. Well, I would love for there to be a feature film, but it's that's such a lovely thing to hear. As a writer, that's really, really wonderful that it stayed with you like that. And indeed, there were some other people for whom that was the case. Some people came 3 or 4 nights, and some people really loved it. But I have to say, that there will always be someone who finds a lot of profundity or something in your weird thing. But I really think the goal for everyone is to get everyone to like it. I think that it is entirely possible to do both, and they're in no way mutually exclusive. And one's aim as an artist, I think, I've always thought, but particularly post Edinburgh, I think it's really reinforced this point of view. I think that one's aim should always be to reach as many people as possible and be on a surface level as populist as possible, and to really slip the weird subversive stuff in the cracks. I think that's the ultimate peak of the creative arts, is to be is to make a lot of money, and it's to have your cake and eat it in that way. It's do what Andy Warhol did. Be hugely successful and be the most subversive artist on the planet.
At the same time.
Yeah.
And that is a real skill. I'm just going to say very briefly, if anyone was listening, was that some shows have stayed with me for years. I went to see a show in 2008, I think it was, called Happy Land. It was in the Sea venue in Chambers Street, and it was a big audience, but no one was enjoying it more than me. I'm both delighted and horrified to say. And I remember talking to the cast and the writers afterwards, and they said, well, we love the fact you were in there because you absolutely got it. And I did, and I'm still, here we're 2000, very tail end of 2015 we're talking, and I can still bring almost all of it to life. And back in my mind, it's never going to see the light of day again. And
do you think that you remember it so much because no one else enjoyed it, or is that?
It's not that they didn't enjoy it. I just think that people weren't necessarily getting it as much. That sounds really, look at me, everybody, aren't I? Clever?
No, I know what you mean. Well, sometimes that is, sometimes that's part of the joy of something. It's like it's yours.
Yes, I felt it had been written for me because the people behind it had a sensibility, at least on this occasion, that I absolutely chimed in with. And I'd pay money to see that show again. Well, indeed, almost every show I see I pay money for, but you get the idea.
Yeah, no, I know.
And I think Quentin's gone into that little bucket of absolutely great shows. I have hopes that, I'm not asking you to comment, but I'm hoping, we'll see further iterations in the future.
There will be more. I can tell you this. There will. Quentin is coming back, and he's coming back in a big way.
Quentin
and you
Redux.
will soon hear about Quentin's magnificent return to the London scene
I'm delighted
in 2016.
Talking more about Edinburgh again, though, but what about simple things like physical pacing? Because you were pushing yourself through the ropes. And everyone talks about Edinburgh flu, don't they? I mean, everyone gets something up there, including the punters quite often.
That was it was intense, but it was also a lot of fun. I mean, it was... I'm not going to pretend that I wasn't really enjoying, like, going to bed at 3 a.m. and sleeping until 1 and then getting into costume and makeup and doing, like, 1 performance or 2 performances and then... going to it was like it's like being a kind of very low rent imitation of a rock star. It was a lot of fun. No, but it really was. It was like you play a show at night and then you have a drink and then you go to bed late and you sleep early and then you get into costuming. It was great. It was a whale of a time. Loved it. It was exhausting, but it was great.
And what have you drawn from that? I mean, it's great. The exhausting part, is there anything you can do to... Any advice you can give?
Yeah, I could probably, stop smoking and eat more healthily and do yoga.
Orange.
Yeah, exactly. But, screw it. The main thing I learned is that I really like doing it and I want to keep doing it. So,
Edinburgh, a great experience, one that I hope that we'll have the pleasure of seeing you bring something up to again in future years, whenever and wherever that may be. But it's delightful to me that there's new Henry work coming and people can come and see your Henry in London. Yeah. At this event that's looming. Tell me just thumbnail sketches of some of the other bits and pieces.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we've got some really exciting work by other people, some of whom you may have heard of, some of whom you probably won't have done. We've got a bunch of amazing work from people on the Book Music and Lyrics course. We've got some really interesting self-contained sort of short story musicals based on really kind of bizarre and dark stories. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's one called The Uninventor, about someone who removes dangerous things from existence. There's another one about finding serial killers in the Yellow Pages. And then we've also got a couple of things from sort of submission, because we, as well as getting our friends and people whose work that we know and admire and want to help, we also put out a call, and 2 of the pieces that we've got on this night are people who we're getting to know through this event. And one of them is sort of amazing kind of feminist pirate thing. I don't know too much about it, but it looks like it's going to be incredible.
Because there is a history of female pirates, isn't there? Sometimes as females and sometimes just as men. So that's
well, now they're in the musical theatre stage.
So it's
about time, yeah. Then there's also a kind of, I believe there's a kind of Greek sort of pantheon type thing.
Really?
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting thing. But
this is a broad range of options, isn't it?
It's a broad range of options. But as you said earlier, there is always a danger with these nights that it's just an overwhelming grab bag of stuff with no kind of through line and such a variance in quality and things. And we really don't want this to be like that. Hannah and I have have set out to make this night coherent in that all of the pieces are linked by an aspiration to quality and entertainment. And you're not going to be, if you come to this night, which I think you should, it's on January the 5th at Rich Mix, and you will be seeing things that have been made and put on their feet with an intention to please an audience, and that is a rare thing in these scratch nights, I would say.
Well, one of the joys of things like this, as I say, is actually, even if you don't like someone's work, you might appreciate it, but if you don't like someone's work, my word, in 15 minutes' time, there'll be something else,
yeah, sure,
completely different. And as you say, they are outward-facing rather than inward, so everything about this sounds positive. How can people get tickets? What are the website? What are the content details?
If you look on the Rich Mix website, which I believe is richmix.co.uk or richmix.com, I'm not sure, but if you type in Rich Mix, you'll find it. It'll be in the upcoming events, and you can also, if you check out, Quentin Denton or Jimmy Getaway, which is my band, or Henry Carpenter, even, you'll find all the stuff just by trawling around.
So it's easily found.
It's easily found, yeah.
I'll definitely be there, and I have to say I do like these events because there's something different. But they're still musical theatre, so anyone who loves musical talk and musical theatre, I hope we should at least give it a whirl.
Absolutely.
And it's a perfect way of starting the year, for goodness sake, because I always find we're full of self-indulgence in the build-up to Christmas. There's too much chocolate in the world, too much alcohol in the world. I love pantomimes, but they are an indulgent form of musical theatre. January, cold, stark light of day. Let's make 2016 a year of creativity.
This is a keen, lean, energetic kick in the pants for creatively start to 2016.
This is your New Year's resolution musical theatre in Lycra.
Yeah, totally.
Now, Henry, it's always good to talk to you, and I hope that we'll talk to you again about future things, but just the two shows you've spoken about within this showcase are different and fascinating and engaging, and I've got a smile on my face just from the title of Summer Nights in Space, possible exclamation mark. So I think that's fantastic. But as a little whetter of the appetite, you very kindly said that we can play one of the songs from it. Do you want to tell us a little bit, contextualise?
Of course. This is the opening number from Summer Nights in Space. It's called I Belong in Space. Every song in Summer Nights in Space, I should say, ends with the word space in the title.
It really?
Yeah. And this song is Captain John Spartan, who is the spaceman, sort of talking to himself in his captain's blog and reminiscing about how he got into space and the things that brought him to space, and just sort of thinking about his life and how it's led up to him appearing in space. And this song is an epic character journey into space in 4.5 minutes. I hope you enjoy it.
Henry, thank you.
Thank you so much, Thus. And thank you to anyone who's listening. Happy New Year and Happy Christmas.
When I was a boy, growing up in the biodome, I would gaze through the plexiglass window with tears on my face. I would stand there and stare at the rockets' red glare as they flare with no care through the acid rain air, and I'd think to myself, I belong in space. I belong in space, not here in town. Every week another robot uprising, it's getting me down, choking down smoke tangled up in magnetic tape. There's too many ads, nothing ever stays clean, and I hate the taste of Soylent Green, oh baby. You know I gotta escape, 'cause I belong in space. So I went to space, where the facts of space are taught. Space. They have a silver tennis court. Space, where every astronaut's to go. I said here, I am. Sign me up, I wanna be a spaceman. Fly around and do stuff with a wham bam. I'm space's biggest fan. Send me up, no need to ever bring me down. 'Cause I belong in space, I belong in space, I belong in space. Then Space Base said, your eyes are bright and your hair is fine, but you can't go to space 'cause you're only 9. So study hard and in a few more years you can take your pick of the space careers. So I studied hard for the GCE, never went to parties but they weren't for me. I just stayed in my room with a skipping rope, peak physical condition, I never smoked dope. And when I went back to Space Base, they took one look and said, you're in the right place. You're a credit to all the human race. Someone get this boy a bayonet. Congratulations, John Spartan, you're our latest space cadet, 'cause you belong in space, you belong in space, you belong in space. So I trained, and I trained, and I never once complained. And 10 years later there's a knock on my door, said they had an opening in the science corps, and they'd get me into space as soon as they were able. Well, I was so excited that I jumped on a table. 3, 4. Woo! Yes! I'm finally going into space! Yes! In your face! In your face! And soon enough I got my mission, didn't once read my commission. I was just so proud and happy as I climbed on board the spaceship. I climbed on board the spaceship, strapping in all clear for takeoff. And then I arrived. All was calm and so beautiful. As I gazed through the porthole once more, there were tears on my face. Then I noticed some words painted up on the vents. They were written in lipstick and signed by my friends. They said, so long, John. You belong in space.
What a wonderful song. That was Henry Carpenter there being characteristically interesting about the craft of writing musical theatre. He may not agree with me, but I say that Henry Carpenter is one of the most subversively funny writers currently on the musical theatre scene. So, how can you go to the Lowdown, which is the scratch night that we've been talking about? Well, it's on Tuesday the 5th of January, and it takes place at 7:30 in the evening at the Rich Mix Cinema and Art Centre at 35 to 47 Bethnal Green Road, which is in the Shoreditch and Bethnal Green areas of London. The website www.richmix.org.uk, and you can phone their box office because the tickets are only £4, and here's the number 020 7613 7498. I think this is a really exciting start to the new year, and I'm delighted to be able to bring it to you. I'm also even more delighted to be able to attend, and perhaps I'll get to see you there too. If not, then join me again in a future episode of Musical Talk. We've got a number of shows looming for you in the course of the next year, which, as I said before, is our 10th anniversary, and they'll range from everything, from the oldest to the newest, from the biggest to the smallest kind of musical theatre. I do hope you'll join me and all my fellow presenters here on Musical Talk for those episodes. But for the time being, there's probably only one thing to say, and that's goodbye. So let's have a crack at doing that. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2016. Except for the song where the copyright remains with Henry Carpenter. And my thanks to him for letting us play that song on this programme.
I'm so bored!
Ladies and gentlemen, the clients have come out to play inside the auditorium. You may now begin retaking your seats. Don't forget that due to adverse weather conditions inside the auditorium, no food or drink is permitted. If you haven't had a chance to finish your ice cream, simply return it to a member of our sales team who will look after it for you until the end of the performance. Thank you.
That's smart. Adverse weather conditions in the... It's a snow show,
It's
isn't it,
lava,
this
isn't
thing?
it?
Yeah.
Right.
haven't seen it. I don't really like clowning, but I admire it for what it is rather than enjoy it.
I admire clowns. I've met a few people who do clowns. They're always like intensely, very just intense people who like read a lot of philosophy and do a lot of push-ups. Yeah,
and then put
exactly
balloons down their trousers.
They're always very, very serious people.
What an interesting type.
Yeah.